So you've been rejected for having herpes, and I gotcha. I've made some videos about herpes before. If you haven't seen my 2 previous ones about it, they're here. I have one that's like kind of on the 101 basics of herpes and also my own story with it. And then I do have one about dating with herpes. But this is going to be a deep dive specifically on getting rejected for having herpes and how to deal with that. People dealing with, coping with, and fearing rejection on the basis of having genital herpes like I do is the thing that I come across the most. I've been talking publicly about having herpes, how it ties into self-worth and sensuality and confidence for a couple of years now, since I got HSV2 genitally in 2019. So I'm going to do this video in 3 parts today because the first thing I want to go through is just kind of my own experience with it. Then I want to give you some like general coping thoughts around rejection on the basis of having herpes. And then I want to get into some questions that I got from actual people from my audience and followers who sent in questions for this video. I think that the number one thing that plagues people around getting herpes or worrying about getting herpes is the idea or notion that it's going to keep them from finding anyone to date or connect with in the future. There is definitely a forever alone theme going on among people who struggle with their herpes diagnosis. And I feel ya because I went through it when I was initially diagnosed also. Diagnosis itself sounds like a really loaded term because really most of us have herpes and it's just a matter of who finds out they have it and who doesn't. Because it's asymptomatic most of the time, it's not in routine STI screenings. Generally, most of us are not going to know that we have it unless we're in the small percentage of people who actually get symptoms and find out. One of the saddest things that I see in people around me struggling with their herpes diagnosis is that they either remove themselves from the dating scene entirely, think that they should only date other people who have herpes, or just give up on dating for extended periods of time. Not only because they don't think a partner will accept them, but also because they're so worried about transmitting to another person. Congratulations, that makes you a really good person who's probably the least likely to transmit. I would say that the worst thing you could do having herpes is let it hold you back from living your life and also from getting yours, meeting the people that you're meant to meet, having the loves of your life that you're meant to have. The other thing I think people really struggle with is that they now have something that they have to disclose to a partner or should disclose to a partner, and the discomfort that having that kind of conversation brings. But I say it kind of just encourages that sexual health conversation that we might want to be having anyways. And it's a two-way street because what is your partner's situation? I share a lot about my own dating journey with herpes. I make a lot of content about it, especially on my TikTok. I talk about it on my Instagram. I've shared personal experiences that I've had with dating. And I would say still in the 4 years, 2021, 2022, 2022, that I've had it, I've had like 99% positive experiences. And I know that a lot of people might be like, well, of course it's gonna be easier for you because you're a woman, you're attractive, etc., etc. But let me tell you, it really just comes down to someone's education, and that's that. Whether you're dateable or consider yourself dateable in general is a thing that's completely separate from having herpes. And fortunately, something you can work on separately from having herpes also, but I'm not a dating guru who's gonna tell you how to become more dateable. It's just about becoming the best version of yourself. Love yourself and date yourself first. Apart from the odd fade out that I've had on dating apps, which has been really far and few between, and could be for any reason other than the herpes, I've only had like 2 more significant rejections for having herpes in my 4 years, or let's say 2 years, because I haven't dated for all of that of dating. One was a disclosure that didn't go so well after a first date, and the other was someone that I dated for a couple months who I caught feelings for and who later developed an anxiety around it, and it ended because of that. That was a tough one. But if I can survive it, so will you. I've gotten into those stories in more detail on my other social media accounts, but I will summarize really quickly in saying that that first date was someone who did present quite a few red flags anyways. Usually that tends to be the case. You kind of look back in hindsight and realize that that partner probably wasn't a match for you. All we had done after our first date was kiss, and as things started to get heated, which was happening way faster than I was comfortable with, I stopped us to let him know my situation. Wasn't expecting to even get that far that first date. and he reacted kind of poorly. Like pulled back, kind of freaked out, and thought that he could now get my genital herpes from having kissed me on my mouth. Even after some light education, he couldn't really wrap his head around the fact that that wasn't possible, despite the fact that he told me that his mom had herpes orally, and like there was a way bigger chance that he already had oral herpes from his mom growing up, but that's besides the point. That situation was more upsetting and harder to deal with around how he acted afterwards, which was ghosting me and just never talking to me again. And I didn't take that super well, but I have some insights from that I'll share later. The other situation was someone that I really enjoyed, respected, developed feelings for, but they started to develop a lot of anxiety, or at least admit that they had a lot of anxiety around it as time went on. And we kind of both decided that it was better to part ways, because working past someone's health anxiety and paranoia around herpes is not gonna be an easy thing to work with. I have health anxiety myself. I know how irrational it can be, and I don't blame someone for not being able to get past it despite knowing that they're taking risks with other people. I do also think that if our connection was strong enough, it wouldn't matter. So the next thing I want to go through is kind of like general coping thoughts around anticipating or worrying about or dealing with rejection around herpes. Some of it is going to tie into questions that I answer later, but I just want to go through these first because I feel like they can be a list of things that you can almost like write down, plaster on your mirror, and read to yourself every day like affirmations. So the first thing is that you're not the biggest risk. Everyone is. We'll hold ourselves back because we think we're a major risk to people and that we're going to be transmitting our herpes to everybody that we come across, but that is just not the case. Because of the nature of herpes and how incredibly common it is, the fact that it's not in routine STI screenings, the fact that it's mostly asymptomatic, the fact that most people who have it don't know, the fact that it can shed asymptomatically during periods that we're not aware of. Most people are walking around with herpes and unaware of it and transmitting to each other anyways. The majority of people that I ever hear from over the last few years of being public about this, who tell me how they got herpes, got it from a partner that wasn't aware, seemingly, that they had it or was maybe dishonest about it. I have rarely heard of cases where people get herpes from a partner that they went into knowing that they had herpes and knowing that they were taking a risk. I myself didn't get herpes from a partner who I was aware had herpes. I don't know if he was aware. I suspect that he was. You can watch my video about my story and learn more about that. That also brings me to the next general kind of coping thought, which is that we need to compare this to oral herpes. So most of the time, oral herpes is caused by HSV1. You can learn more about the basics of herpes in this video. Rarely, it's also caused by HSV2, but really commonly, genital herpes is caused by HSV1 as well as HSV2. People mistakenly think that oral herpes is just oral and doesn't transmit anywhere else, or isn't the same thing, purely because it's not stigmatized or regarded the same way as when it's genital. They also think that HSV1 is the good one and HSV2 is the bad one because it tends to be more common genitally. But HSV1 is just as common genitally. And I promise you that if you get genital herpes, you're not really bothered by whether it's HSV1 or 2 because you're still dealing with the stigma of having genital herpes. You could break apart some slight advantages and disadvantages of having one type or the other, but it's not like you're walking into a store and selecting which type you're gonna get. But 2 in 3 people have HSV1, which most of the time might be oral. And so 2 in 3 people that you come across or date are at risk of giving you herpes genitally if you're engaging in oral with them, which most of us are. And I know that might make the world seem scary, but viruses are just a part of life, and it's pretty tough to avoid herpes overall unless you know that you have it and you can do better at taking precautions. Which is why you're actually a lower risk than the average person, because you know that you have it. If you do get symptoms, you likely recognize what they are and you can avoid activity when you're feeling those symptoms, and you can take precautions and do things with your lifestyle to lower your chances of shedding and lower the risk of transmitting to your partner. Even things like the daily antiviral, which a lot of people opt to take but is totally optional, can also reduce your shedding. And there are some statistics that are a little bit hard to find, but the chances of actually transmitting to your partner with protection and antivirals is something like 1%. So the average person walking around who maybe gets cold sores that they don't regard as herpes and don't even disclose because they don't think they have to is actually a way bigger risk than you having genital herpes worrying about transmitting to your partner and doing everything you can not to do so. If you have HSV1 genitally already and that's what you're struggling with, you can also comfort yourself with the fact that the majority of people already have HSV1, and so they're generally going to be immune to it already. It's really rare that you'll get the same type in a different part of your body. That usually happens at the first point of infection, where it can enter from multiple sites, but generally if you already have the virus somewhere, your body has immunity against it. The other kind of general coping thought is that if people aren't going to date you because you have genital herpes, they should also not date people who have oral herpes, and that's likely not what they're doing. Most people someone comes into contact with are going to have oral herpes, and whether they get cold sores or not doesn't matter, because they can also shed asymptomatically and transfer it during those times, so they're risking it anyways. So if someone thinks that they would never date someone with herpes and they're not also checking to see if their partners have it orally, is full of shit. And it's going to be tougher to find out if your partners have herpes orally or genitally or anywhere else, because of the fact that it's mostly asymptomatic and because of the fact that we're not routinely screened to see if we have it, especially orally. Another general coping thought is that the majority of educated people are going to be cool with it and not see it as a big deal. I tend to want to date partners who are educated and open-minded and who can kind of logically weigh risk factors like that. It dispels a lot of the stigma that's there needlessly. Whether I'm dating someone casually or romantically or falling in love, I want them to be educated and be able to wrap their heads around it. I see it a lot like HPV, which I've researched myself in relation to a potential partner. I already knew a lot about it, but looking into it, it's so similar to herpes in the sense that it's not in general screenings, especially for men. Most of us don't know whether we have it or not. Everyone is potentially a risk. So the person who tells me that they have it is actually a more trustworthy bet to me, because they've been honest and transparent and they know their status. Another general coping thought that I think is really interesting and funny to think about is that rejection is just a natural part of dating anyways. And if you're not getting rejected for herpes, you might get rejected for anything else. I've had things fizzle out or face rejection before I've even had a chance to disclose my herpes. Think about all the reasons that you've rejected potential partners that have nothing to do with that either. So I think that a lot of the fear and anxiety is around rejection in general, and thinking that we're gonna have to face so much more of it now that we have herpes, when we're gonna be facing it anyways. So those are kind of the coping thoughts, but we're gonna get into some actual steps that you can take if you have been rejected for herpes, and then getting into some questions. So let's say you have let a potential partner know that you have herpes, and then they express some kind of issue with it or reject you for it, and now you're dealing with that rejection. The first thing that I would do is process. We need to give ourselves time and space to process our emotions, especially initially after some kind of event like that. Rejection is going to sting no matter what, no matter why it happens. There's an air show going on, so you might hear some planes in the background. What's interesting is these steps are probably going to help you for dealing with rejection in general, because that's really what it's all about. So give yourself the time and space to really process and feel the emotions of that initial rejection, preferably away from that partner. For example, when I first encountered my rejection situations, I definitely had some emotions arise in the moment, especially after that first date. I just felt like crying a fucking river, but I was trying to hold it in because I barely knew this person. The second person, it was more of an emotional, tearful conversation, and that's okay. It happens. Sometimes you do want to process a little bit and analyze and discuss together, but then you want to deal with the majority of your feelings after and away from that partner. I think the one thing that I learned from that first date rejection is that I got pretty upset over their behavior afterwards, and I should have just let it go. I was more pissed off about the ghosting than the rejecting, but their actions were clear. In processing your emotion, you might need to just... There's your little baby. In processing your emotion, you might just need to cry it out, smack some pillows, have a pity party for yourself for a couple days. Like, just let the feelings run their course, because we know that when we resist those feelings, it doesn't help anybody. She's looking for a new spot to lie down.
Oh, yes, the blanket.
Okay, the next thing I would do is analyze how your disclosure went. I don't want you to go overboard with this, but it does help to look back on exactly what happened when you're in a more grounded space and what you might have done better in the future, but also assessing how that partner reacted and what you did and didn't like about it. A lot of things are going to get revealed about that person as a potential partner and how they reacted to that information, because at the end of the day, it's you sharing something vulnerable, and how somebody reacts to that says so much about their character. And you can weigh that against whether they would have been a good potential partner for you or not. Most of the time when I've shared that I had herpes, I had really compassionate, thoughtful responses. People saying that, they really appreciate me letting them know. They love my honesty and transparency. Some found it really sexy. Whereas people who reacted negatively or cowered away or ghosted or unmatched is just like, ew, that's a put off. And how did you disclose it? Something that came up for me with that first date disclosure was that it was in the heat of the moment, and I don't generally like to do it that way, but I wasn't really expecting for it to happen. And sometimes you do find yourself in situations that you didn't anticipate and you just roll with it. I do feel like I prefer letting someone know ahead of time, not because anything we were doing was risky yet. You can obviously take your time, go on some dates. Like if you have genital herpes and you have a makeout session, that's perfectly fine. They don't need to know that you have genital herpes because you didn't even go there. If someone makes it seem like this massive deal breaker about you that should have been the first thing that came out of your mouth, they're a no for me already. Because again, they're likely not expecting the same thing of someone who has it orally, and they probably don't know their own sexual health status. So if you need to come out the gate with that information before you even touch them, they need to do the same. And while we're at it, why don't we share what kind of mental health struggles we have? What our bank accounts say, what our living situation is, whether we have kids or not. Those things are all important in weighing whether someone is a match for you, but they don't need to come straight away before it's relevant. A sexual health conversation becomes relevant if you think that you're going to have sex or start to take those risks. It's also completely fair to give yourself a chance to get to know someone and for them to get to know you. You might not even find that you have a reason to disclose because you're not into them. But in analyzing how you disclosed it, sometimes we disclose in a way that might be laden with a lot of heavy emotion that we still need to sort through and process. Like if you still don't feel good about your diagnosis, you're not necessarily going to disclose to people in a lighthearted, inviting way. Like a lot of people will disclose to potential partners by saying things like, I know this is a deal breaker. I know it's like a huge, awful thing that I need to talk to you about. I understand if you don't want to date me or you never want to see me again. That kind of thing is not really going to set you up for success because you're scaring your partner away. And it's not about making light of herpes in a dishonest way, because if anything, that is more akin to the reality of herpes. What isn't as true to the reality is how heavily we weigh it, because that's more like our emotion and stigma that's like attaching to the experience of having herpes that we're putting on someone else. I see it a lot like just information that is on an as need to know basis that I'm relaying to that partner when they need to know it. So I try to go about telling them just like I would tell them that I own a car. Hey, I have herpes. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm totally open to talk about it. Or something you should know before we go there is that I have herpes. We can take precautions, etc. I probably will do a more in-depth video on disclosing and talking to partners about it, but I try to go into it with as much brevity and lightheartedness as possible. Because I also want to gauge what that person already knows or thinks about it and how they're going to react to my initial statement and what kind of questions they're going to have, if any. Okay, so that kind of ties into the next part with processing a herpes rejection, is in analyzing any red flags with that partner. So analyzing their response is also going to give you any red flags with them, or even just like before you got to that point of disclosure, maybe there were already some things that weren't aligning. And often when we get rejected, we can kind of like erase all the negative things about that partner, and we suddenly just feel like our world has collapsed. They were the person for us. They now don't want us. Like it can really kind of cloud our judgment of that person, because now we just feel like we're not wanted and we desperately want to change that. So if you can, in a grounded way, after processing your emotions, even like write down things that didn't necessarily work with that partner, especially things that might not have worked in how they reacted to you disclosing your herpes to them, that's really going to help you weigh whether they would have been a good partner for you or not. Often you might find that you actually dodged a bullet. That person that I disclosed to after the first date showed me very clearly how avoidant they are when something challenging comes up, and also their lack of education and ignorance on the topic. That's not someone that I'm going to want to build anything else with. I want someone who's mature and able to communicate what they're thinking and feeling, and who has respect for me no matter what the dynamic of the relationship is going to be. Okay, so the next thing in processing a rejection is to review and remind yourself of your positive qualities and the things that make you amazing, and to work on rebuilding your confidence. Any rejection is gonna affect our confidence or might affect our confidence, and that's natural. So I want you to like write down the positive, amazing qualities about yourself that are still there and always were and always will be. And you can even get loved ones and friends in your life to help you with that. Just ask a couple close friends to send you a list of like 5 things that are amazing about you. And that can be a mix of personality things and also looks things to like just boost your confidence in general. Also remind yourself of the goals that you have, the dreams that you have, the things that you're excited about that make you you, that are so much more than this little fact that you happen to have a virus that most people have. Because when you have been rejected for this virus, it can make it feel like it's the only and most important and relevant thing about you. So I want you to remember everything else that makes you you and makes you amazing and that you can still focus on. Like if someone rejects me for having my herpes, I'm like, I'm writing a fucking book. Okay, I'm writing a fucking book. That's also where I bring in some sensuality practices, and I have some videos on that from the past that you can look at. Things like dressing and adorning yourself, taking photos of yourself, videos of yourself, admiring yourself. That's not narcissistic, that is self-love. Reminding yourself of the badass, sensual hottie that you are. Get yourself some lingerie, strut your stuff, or even just engage in the hobbies and things that you're really good at to remind yourself of all the skills you possess. And then the last step of recovering or processing a herpes rejection would be to put yourself back out there. You need to remember that it's a numbers game, and I know that it's such a cliche thing that people say, but there are plenty of fish in the sea. Remember that after any significant breakup or loss or rejection that you've had, you might have thought about how you're never gonna find a person like this again. You want someone that's exactly like them. You don't want anybody else. You don't want to start over with anyone. Nobody else is out there, blah, blah, blah. But all of that gets erased as soon as you meet the next person, and you always do. There is no way that on a planet of billions and billions of people, you're not gonna have a ton of potential matches. And even if you have a negative dating streak for a while, which you can have with or without herpes, don't let that set the tone for how dating is going to be in general. You can have a few positive experiences, a few negative experiences, and if you gave up at either point, you would have a completely distorted view of what dating is like. Over time, you get to see like a mix of different experiences, different reactions, different kinds of people, different education levels. You start to fine-tune your values and figure out what kind of things you want in a potential partner. And then you can make another list of the kinds of things that you're seeking in your dating life. What kind of partners you want, what kind of experiences you want. Are you looking for love? Are you looking for fun, casual encounters to explore your sexuality? Like, get clear on those specific kinds of things that you really desire, and take the herpes out of the equation, because it won't hold you back from anything. Whether you want to be poly, you want to be in a throuple, you want to go do a group thing, fall in love, start a family, all of those things are totally plausible. If someone with oral herpes does it, why wouldn't you? And again, most people engaging in any of that stuff have herpes and don't know it. There are 2 more things with getting rejected with herpes that I want to add. One is to never accept conditions, and the other is to not waste your time when someone's hesitating. Some people might try to come back to you with conditions like taking certain things off the table in your intimate life, taking intimacy off the table in general, and I would never ever recommend subjecting yourself to that, because that is going to absolutely kill your self-worth and confidence and self-love. There is no reason that you should accept partial intimacy from anybody on the basis of having herpes. Again, they're taking that risk with any other partner, and if they have a lot of discomfort over certain acts with you, then that's something that they need to work on themselves. I've also unfortunately heard of a lot of situations where people accept partners who, on the basis of them having herpes, are cool with them pleasing them, being the herpes negative partner, or so they think, but they're not cool with pleasing their herpes positive partner, and selfishly invite pleasure for themselves only, which isn't even logical in terms of like reducing risk. It's just an asshole move. Like, I can't imagine being with a partner who looks at any part of my body as so risky that they're never gonna touch it or interact with it. Of course, if I was ever having an active flare-up or feeling symptoms of shedding, I would avoid activity. That's different. But if consistently I have an arrangement where someone's gonna avoid doing certain things with me, hell no to that. And then if you sense a lot of hesitation or anxiety from a partner, That to me is also a deal breaker for dating. Anxiety is going to be really, really hard to get around because it's not rational and it's not based in logic. And someone who's already hesitating or taking a while to wrap their heads around this is likely not going to come back stigma-free and totally okay with the knowledge that you have herpes. When I disclose to people and they have positive reactions, those reactions are usually straight away. Okay, so now we're gonna get to some specific questions that I got from my audience around herpes rejection. I kind of grouped them into some categories of general themes that we've covered. So the first question was how to feel more confident when we disclose and to not let this be a setback. So I would say that so much of that comes down to practice. The more that you do it, the more comfortable that you get with it and the easier it gets. My very first disclosure was a far cry from how I disclose today.
I'm sorry.
If you think about taking on public speaking, for example, your first time public speaking might be a total mess and nightmare. But if you've done it 50 times, I would assume that it becomes a piece of cake. Also, the more comfortable that you get with your own herpes status and feeling confident and good around that, the more confident you're gonna get with talking to people about it. Something that also really helped me was just starting to tell people in my life about it, because initially I hadn't told anyone about it. And when I started to tell friends and even later family, which you don't have to do, I did all that because I knew I was gonna be public about it someday, so I just wanted everyone to know. But even getting practice talking to regular people in your life about it can help you build confidence around having it. You might encounter so many other people in your life who also have it. I've literally sat in a salon getting my hair done by a good friend of mine, and we were talking about it, and I was openly talking about my genital herpes experience, and I had another stylist come up to me and be like, oh my god, I have it too, and I love that you're just like casually and openly talking about it because it's not a big deal. I wouldn't see having genital herpes as any more of a setback than someone who has it orally, most of which are not likely disclosing because they're not told to, and the stigma doesn't tell them that they have to, the same way that you having it genitally are told. Another really similar question to that was how to disclose without like fumbling or getting awkward. A lot of that might come down to your personal comfort level with how to tell people. Some people are more comfortable in person, some people would rather do it through text, some people would rather do it on the phone, and it might take you a few tries to figure out what's easiest for you. But as you get more comfortable with your status and you get practice disclosing, it's gonna get easier for you in general, no matter how you do it. Sometimes the situation necessitates how you disclose. Like, I've done it to people in person that I've met, you know, in a bar, and then we want to like hang out after. I've disclosed to people on apps after we first match or after the conversation is starting to get kind of steamy, in person during a date, and I've disclosed to people during a phone or FaceTime call. Even if you're awkward the first few times or you fumble, know that it is going to get easier the more that you do it. I know it sounds cheesy, but you can also practice saying it to yourself or write a little script for yourself. You can also approach it like a two-way conversation and ask them what their sexual health status is and then share yours, because it is a two-way street. And that can take some of the pressure off the experience and feeling like you're the only risk in the room, because you're not. So the next set of questions are related to self-worth, one of them being how not to feel disgusting. I know that having herpes can make you feel that way because of the intense stigma that's attached to it. A lot of that also comes from the photos that people have seen, and they assume based off of those photos that that's what it looks like and that's what you're walking around with all the time. There's a lot of embarrassment around it being on genitals because those are just a shamed part of our body in general. So obviously we don't do well with the genitals that we're already shaming having anything unsightly on them. But why is a blister more unsightly than an acne scar? Why is a blister more unsightly than eczema or psoriasis? Why is a blister any more unsightly than just like a cut or a wound? We feel disgusting about it because society makes us think it's disgusting, because society generally demonizes anything related to sex and sexuality. Obviously, anything abnormal on our skin might give us some grievance, but it really is just a blister, if that. And herpes can present like a paper cut. It can present as nothing at all and just be like internal symptoms. And you also want to remind yourself that the very first outbreak that you get is the worst, and none of them will ever be like that or should ever be like that again. Once your body gets used to the virus, recurring flare-ups are so much more minor. And I think that people are used to seeing photos of that very first outbreak, and that's what they assume herpes is like overall. A lot of people who get an initial oral outbreak also have several blisters, and then later they just get a recurring cold sore. Try to counter those thoughts or temptations to relegate yourself to some disgusting, unworthy thing by doing the opposite of what it tells you to do. So even during times where I might be having a flare-up and some of those stigmatized thoughts might come back, That's when I bust out the lingerie. That's when I get myself all pretty and go out. Instead of feeling tempted to stay home and feel sorry for myself, I'll go out with my girlfriends or go out on that date. And of course you want to like self-nurture and soothe as well, but don't let the stigma push you into a cave of self-deprecation. The next questions are tied to self-worth, and I touched on them earlier because they had to do with like someone hesitating around your herpes status or giving you conditional things around accepting your herpes status. But just to reiterate, you should never accept something conditional because that is totally gonna kill your self-worth. Someone who's also hesitating for a long time or who is taking a long time to come around might be like breadcrumbing or slowly fading away, and you don't need to put yourself through that. Generally, I feel like if someone doesn't hesitate around it, that's what I strive for, because just because you have herpes doesn't mean that you should settle for anything less than you deserve. I want someone for whom it's not going to be a big deal at all, who's not going to worry about it at all, who's going to make me feel better about it and even make me forget about it, for whom there's no hesitation because they're totally down with me and they're educated on the topic, or they're willing to get educated, and we can just move forward. So the next question was related to that fear of being alone forever, which I brought up earlier. The thought that no one's ever going to be with you is just a lie that we tell ourselves in the face of that stigma. And we can tell ourselves that anyways. We can tell ourselves that we're going to be alone forever just because we've had a string of bad dating experiences or we've met a few bad apples in a row. And that goes back to that whole concept of there being billions of people on this planet and there being absolutely no way that you're not going to find matches. We just have to put ourselves out there, and we have to do it continuously, as hard as that might be, because it's kind of similar to how, and this is something I have been sort of dealing with myself, like wanting to meet new and aligned friends, but staying home all the time and not going anywhere where you can actually meet people. Then I'm not going to meet people or make those friends. I'm not going to make those friends sitting in my apartment all day. The next area is around risk and feeling like you're a risk that no one's going to be willing to take. And that goes back to what we talked about earlier with absolutely everybody being a risk for herpes. If you're sexually active, there's a very high likelihood that you will get herpes at some point, even if you haven't been sexually active, because we know that it also spreads non-sexually. And remember that you're still taking a risk with your partner. What's their sexual health status? What's their etiquette around getting screened and tested? Are they someone that you feel safe with or safe enough with? Sexuality in general and just life period doesn't come without risk. That's why they say that there's no such thing as safe sex, only safer sex. And then there's the question of not wanting to sleep with someone who doesn't have it out of the fear of spreading it. If you have a lot of fear and anxiety around transmitting herpes to someone, you're likely one of the safer partners out there. Any person that person comes across is a risk to them for herpes. And if they're also consenting and willing to get into like a casual or serious or romantic relationship with you, they're accepting that potential risk. And if we have trouble dealing with that, I think that that's a separate issue, because I have come across a lot of people whose partner is totally okay with the risk and isn't worried about it, but they are. There's a lot of studies that have been done that you can look at with couples where one person had herpes and one didn't, and the rate of transmission between them over years was still super low. People assume that being with someone with herpes means that you're signing up to get it, and that's not the case. And again, most of the time people are gonna get it from a partner from their past. They're already going to have it asymptomatically and have no idea. So you're not signing them on to like an episode of Fear Factor. So not wanting unprotected sex with a partner is something that I think too is like related to your own personal anxiety around transmitting that you can work through. You can absolutely have any level of protection that you and your partner agree to, or lack of protection that you and your partner agree to. You have to remember that viruses aren't like a sure thing. Even if you had a flare-up and had unprotected sex, it's not a sure thing that your partner is going to get it. Just like you can sit in a room with somebody who has a cold and you don't end up getting that cold. Your body also has to be susceptible to infection at that time. And I'm not saying that that's a risk you necessarily want to take. Obviously, when you're having a flare-up, that's when you're the most contagious in the specific area where you get it, because people seem to think that they have it everywhere. But of course, you can do unprotected activities, and people conceive children all the time. We're engaging in oral activities unprotected 99% of the time. So if it's important to you that you go unprotected, especially with a long-term partner, I think that there are ways that you can work yourself up to that, Even going on daily antivirals is going to greatly reduce that risk. Again, someone who has oral herpes isn't thinking that they're sworn to using dental dams with their partners for the rest of their life either, when they are also risking giving it to their partners genitally just the same, and there's way more people who have it orally. So these two questions were related to rejection, but we did talk about them earlier. I just thought this comment was funny because, like I was saying earlier, we can be rejected for any reason besides herpes or before we even have a chance to disclose, and that can be a humbling but funny experience and reminder of the fact that there's so much more out there that we can reject partners for or get rejected for. Responding with grace when rejected, that's something that I can really relate to with my first experience after that first date. That partner also cut me off and didn't really give me a chance to process with them. And that's why I talk about like really working on processing alone away from that partner, especially if they shut the door and don't allow you to communicate with them any further. And as much as that feeling sucks, I think it's easiest to just accept that that's a shitty way for that person to respond, and they just showed you a massive red flag and reason why you would have been better off not dating them. Dealing with our emotions can be really hard in the moment, and especially if someone has a really rude, negative reaction to you, that's hard not to feel really affected by. But again, that just goes to show the shittiness of that person and the reward in the fact that you dodged that bullet. And then the last question related to something that I do hear from people a lot, and that is the fear of being outed for having herpes by that person, either in retaliation or just in reacting negatively to your disclosure and trying to shame you for it, especially if it's within a community that you're both part of, like school, friend group, what have you. My answer to that is to take any power from that action, from that person, and own it. Because if you own the fact that you have herpes, even if you were forced into it, which is really awful of that person to do to you, they can't touch you. If you're unbothered, even if you have to fake it till you make it, they can't bother you. It's a lot like how you respond to bullying situations. Obviously, you would cut that person off and you'd no longer want them to have any part of your life. And anyone who joins that bandwagon of judging and criticizing and shaming you is just signing a deal with fucking karma too. It'll immediately reveal people in your life that you don't want there. And if they hadn't floated to the surface over this bomb, it would happen over anything else. So take it like I do as an amazing filter for both dating and general relationships in your life. And also the ignorance and hypocrisy of shaming someone for an STI that you very well could have or get is amazing. So let karma deal with those people and you are unbothered. Don't let that hold you back from disclosing. And if you think someone that you're disclosing to is at risk of doing that to you, then they probably don't deserve to have your attention in the first place. I know that being publicly outed or shamed for having herpes would be an awful thing to endure, but in the rare extreme case that it might happen to you, you will become stronger because of it, and you'll know exactly who to cut out of your life. So I hope that that was helpful for you. I felt like it was a really good deep dive to go into that specific area, especially because I've been recovering from my own experience with it lately. But I can tell you that I am feeling really good again. Nobody can hold you down for long. Just remind yourself that there is always better coming along, and every single experience is a stepping stone to that. The most important thing is your self-love, your self-worth, and your confidence. When you have that, as long as it takes, as much work as it takes, you're untouchable. Love you and see you next time. Bye. Oh my God, I did it.